Before sunrise, on a mild summer morning in June 1995, a 27-year-old television news anchor named Jodi Huisentruit hurriedly left her apartment in Mason City, Iowa, headed for work. But she never arrived, and her disappearance has never been solved. In 2003, two television news reporters created FindJodi.com, a website dedicated to preserving Jodi's memory and keeping her case alive. This is the official Find Jodi podcast. Welcome back to the Find Jodi podcast. I'm Scott Fuller. In this episode, I'm joined by Find Jodi team member Jay Alberio. Jay was the head of investigations for the Woodbury Police Department in Minnesota. He's now retired. But in 1997, he was involved in the arrest of a serial rapist named Tony Jackson. The next year after Jackson's arrest, another member of our team, investigative journalist Caroline Lowe, would be the first to report on a possible link between Tony Jackson and the disappearance of Jodi Huisentruit from Mason City, Iowa in 1995. Jackson currently is in prison and has denied any involvement in Jodi's case. Then again, he has also denied to the media and under oath any involvement in any of the rapes he was later convicted of using, among other evidence, DNA. And as you'll hear, the circumstantial case for his potential involvement in Jodi's abduction seems to have only strengthened over the years. That's coming up next. Tony Jackson was born in Chicago in 1974. At the end of high school, he moved to Ottumwa, Iowa, where he played on the school's basketball team as a senior. And Jackson was something of a standout on a pretty good team that year. He was good enough to earn himself a scholarship to Waldorf College in Forest City. Jackson was living in Mason City and commuting the 40 minutes or so to classes, but in May 1995, he dropped out. About 6 weeks after Tony Jackson dropped out of classes in Forest City, Jodi Huisentruit disappeared in Mason City. Jackson's address in Mason City during this time was on North Connecticut. His apartment was 2 blocks directly east from where Jodi worked. It would not be discovered until a few years later that a serial rapist was living just 2 blocks from Jodi Huisentruit's television station. It was in this apartment on North Connecticut that Tony Jackson was living on June 27, 1995, the morning Jodi disappeared from her apartment complex, about 1 mile from where Jackson lived. Jackson was also working at the Perkins restaurant in Mason City that Jodi occasionally mentioned on the air, and friends say she frequented often. There is no hard evidence that Jodi ever met Jackson, but there are 2 witnesses who say they did. One would be considered a hearsay witness, but the other was a direct eyewitness of Jodi Huisentruit and Tony Jackson together at least once. And one of those witnesses claimed that Jackson not only met Jodi at the Southbridge Lounge in Mason City, but that Tony Jackson went there for the express purpose of meeting Jodi. In an email to Find Jodi, the witness stated, quote, "I just watched a video regarding Tony Jackson, and he says he never met Jodi, and I know this is false." Here's Jay Alberio.
Right. There's actually, I'd say, 2 witnesses to that Jackson had possibly met Jodi at the Southbridge Lounge. The first that came to my attention was through our website. That individual tells me that Jackson reached out to him and said, "Hey, let's go to the Southbridge Lounge." And he says, "Why do we want to go there?" And he tells him, "Well, Jodi Huisentruit hangs out there." "Oh, yeah, so, okay." Well, then Jackson comes over to this place, and he's kind of dressed up in a little bit of a casual business attire. He has a briefcase with him. And then the individual says to him, "Well, what's the briefcase?" "It's nothing. There's nothing in there." Shows them there's actually nothing in there. So they walk to the Southbridge Lounge. He didn't live that far away. They go in, and as soon as they enter the bar, they see Jodi Huisentruit sitting at the bar, and Jackson walks right up to her and starts engaging her in a conversation. And he goes off and does his thing, playing in some games in the sports area. And he talks to her for some time, and then they leave. And there wasn't much discussion about it. And the other one is when Caroline is interviewing a person for her investigative report she does. Just momentarily, the person says, I think Caroline asked her, said, "Did Tony Jackson ever meet Jodi?" And she says, well, I don't know. She says that Tony Jackson had told her at one time that he had met Jodi at the Southbridge Lounge. Now, is it two separate incidences? We don't know. It seems like it comes from two different sources that Jackson had actually met or saw Jodi at the Southbridge Lounge.
5 days before Jodi's abduction, Tony Jackson reportedly had a violent argument with his girlfriend, causing them to separate for about 2 weeks. 3 days after the argument with his girlfriend, Jackson bought a car from a local dealer. On Monday, June 26, 1995, Tony Jackson claims to have left work early after being injured on the job. He reportedly went to the emergency room and left with crutches. For about the next 24 hours, Jackson's whereabouts are unknown or unverifiable. It's in this time that Jodi's abduction occurs. The day after Jodi's abduction, Tony Jackson makes an unscheduled visit to his probation officer. At that time, Jackson is on probation after appearing in court for a second-degree theft charge earlier in the year. How strange is it for an offender to drop in on their probation officer and just make an unannounced visit like Jackson did on that day after Jodi was abducted?
From my experience in the 27 years in law enforcement, it's very unusual for somebody to go into their probation officer's office unannounced, unscheduled. Generally, you have a check-in time and it's scheduled. Okay, you either call in or you come in and check in with that person. So it's pretty unusual.
The following day, June 29th, that's 2 days after Jodi's abduction, Tony Jackson again makes a second unscheduled visit to his probation officer. The next several weeks provide a bookend for Jackson's seemingly odd behavior and the instability within his life around the time Jodi disappeared. On July 5th, Jackson lost his job at the meatpacking plant. The day or so after that, he got back with his girlfriend. And on July 11th, 2 weeks after Jodi's abduction, the car dealer in Iowa demanded the return of that vehicle he'd bought on the 25th due to lack of payment.
Well, we know that his girlfriend had left him, 5 days before Jodi's abduction? And his girlfriend takes the car that they had. And I recently have spoken to her, and she told me the type of car they had at the time was an older Geo.
Let's return to Jackson's car as relates to Jodi's case later in the episode. Right now, we're back in the fall of 1995, months after Jodi's disappearance. And Jackson has hit a more stable stride in his life. Then he enrolled in a business school, but only for a few months. He remained in Mason City for 10 months following Jodi's abduction. In the spring, he moved to Muscatine, Iowa, and got a job at another restaurant there. That fall, in September 1996, Jackson was charged in 2 serious misdemeanors after a domestic assault incident with his girlfriend involving a firearm. Jackson's girlfriend told police at that time he was very violent and had previously tried to commit suicide. After this incident, their relationship ended, and Jackson's girlfriend moved away. 3 months later, Jackson relocated to the Twin Cities and began working at a Burger King in St. Paul. 2 weeks later, at 23 years old, Jackson committed his first known rape. On February 2, 1997, a 20-year-old Minneapolis woman was attacked after driving home from a bar. The victim said Jackson jumped into her car, threatened to kill her, and choked her until she was unconscious.
What really stands out to me in that first attack there, the first one that we're aware of, is, again, the element of stalking. How did he come across this victim? And one of the things that I learned later on is that it's very possible he could have met her at the bar as a nightclub, dance club. But the other part of that, Scott, is on her way home after she left the nightclub, several blocks, probably a mile or so away before the incident happens, she realizes that she's being followed by this car. She goes down several blocks, makes a turn to see if the person's still following her, and she gets stopped at a stoplight, and she's going to make a left turn, and all of a sudden, boom, it's like a blitz attack. Next thing she knows, her car door is being flung open, and Jackson's inserting himself into the car, pushing her over and restraining her, and then they drive up a few more blocks right in the middle of an intersection. Now, this is another crucial point of this, too, is that this is like 3:30 in the morning. Very, very out of time. He's out there prowling, 3:30 in the morning. So there's not a lot of traffic out in that area. It's kind of where the first carjacking incident occurred is a little bit busier area, but then he drives up a few blocks and it's more a little residential. In the middle of the intersection, he starts sexually assaulting her. And then he drives to more of a secluded area behind an apartment complex next to some garages. And again, this is in February, so we have some snowbanks. So he's kind of isolated there, and this way he continues to sexually assault her. And during that assault, at one point, he was strangling her, and she went unconscious. And when she comes to, he makes a statement to her, "Oh, I thought I killed you," and kind of chuckled. I interviewed this victim, and it was very traumatizing to her to go through that, and she thought she was going to be dead. I mean, several times he would tell her not to look at him. He'd have to kill her if she kept looking at him. And at that one, I don't believe there was ever a gun displayed, but there was some threats made.
That statement of, I thought I killed you, that is, I think, so important, but you could take it either as he thought he killed her because he's perhaps killed people in that way before, or you might say he said that because he never has killed anyone before and isn't experienced in that, and so wasn't aware of what it would take to kill someone. Which of those do you think is more likely?
Oh, that's a tough one. It could be either or. It could just be...
I guess I'm saying it's hard to parse that one phrase. Does that speak to experience or lack of experience? It's hard to say.
I would say it'd speak more to experience, having experienced that mode of killing somebody before.
Jackson was not arrested for that first known February 1997 rape, at least not right away. But DNA later linked him definitively to the crime. 10 weeks after the rape in Minneapolis, back in Iowa, another woman is raped. Jackson was back in the area visiting at the time.
There is physical evidence, DNA, that actually linked him to that rape.
Less than 2 weeks after the attack in Iowa, one of the most prolific rape sprees in Minnesota's history commences. On May 4th, Tony Jackson was able to gain entry to a residence in Cottage Grove by asking to use the phone. After checking to make sure nobody else was home, Jackson overpowered the woman who lived there and forced her into the bedroom. Using handcuffs and a gun to gain the woman's compliance, he raped her and warned her not to call police.
He wants to thank her for letting him use the phone, and reaches out and grabs her and spins her around and points a gun to her head and threatens to kill her. And then he proceeds to handcuff her and take her into the bedroom and sexually assault her. And he may at one point threaten to kill anybody that came home, because I think she made some comment about her parents or something. And he made a comment about, well, if parents come home, he's going to have to kill them. And he had a gun. We know he had a gun in that one. Again, I think it's pretty risky to do what he did if he hadn't known that she was home alone. It just doesn't make sense that he would go and risk that, having her parents maybe come in at any time or somebody else come in any time. Again, I think there's some element of stalking involved there, because how did he just pick out this place? It's not like he's driving around and says, "Oh, there's a house. I'm going to go up, knock on the door. I want to see if anybody was there, and then rape her." Because he doesn't ask when he gets there, "Is anybody else home?"
Immediately after the rape, Jackson picked up his girlfriend and gave her a ride. There was no reason to believe that Jackson's girlfriend in St. Paul knew anything about his rape spree while it was happening. 4 days later, on May 8th, Tony Jackson was likely watching a home in St. Paul as a man left. Jackson would have known that meant the man's wife was now home alone. At about 7 a.m. that morning, she is awakened by Tony Jackson attempting to blind her with duct tape. He ties the woman and rapes her, and then rummages through her possessions looking for valuables. He asks for the woman's PIN number and threatens her if she gives him the wrong number, he'll suffocate her with a pillowcase. Before leaving, Jackson warns her to keep quiet or she'll end up like Silver. It's not known who he was referring to. There is evidence that Jackson may have been planning that attack for months. In fact, about 3 months before the rape, The same woman came home to her apartment to find an African-American male standing in her kitchen. Apparently taking him by surprise, she was able to get him to leave. 5 days later, the same man was identified by the woman's coworkers as someone who had come into her place of work while she was there. He made an appointment to see her using a false phone number. So that one, I want to ask you about especially because here is those three events. He's breaking in when no one's there, and then visiting her at her work, and then finally the rape. Who knows how much other stalking behavior involved in that one attack in the 2 months before. We've talked about the stalking element in Jodi's case before, and this victim, maybe of the whole series from Tony Jackson, shows it's proof of Tony Jackson stalking his victims over months.
Absolutely. I mean, he's in her workplace, and the fact that he's actually in her house a couple months, 3 months, close to 3 months, 2.5 months or so, prior to that sexual assault. He's in her house. And for whatever reason at that point, she was able to shag him out of the house. But then he comes back to that in May. That definitely calls for stalking.
Less than 10 days later, a woman was attacked by Jackson in her home in Invergrove Heights. Jackson was wearing a mask as the attack began, and in this assault as well, he threatened the victim with a gun. The victim was known to Jackson. She'd once been roommates with a woman named Nicole that Jackson knew. The night before the attack, Jackson had knocked on a door nearby in the middle of the night asking for a woman named Nicole. Apparently he was knocking on the wrong door, but eventually Jackson found the right unit and raped his fifth known victim.
Knocks but no answer, but he enters that apartment. So he's now, the victim there says at one point that she thought somebody opened her bedroom door, and she thought it may have just been her roommate, a friend or somebody looking. And well, then Jackson falls asleep on the couch in the living room. And it isn't until the victim, she wakes up, she's going to get ready for, I think she's going to school, and she goes and takes a shower, and she comes out of the shower, and at that point, Jackson points a gun to her and then ties her up and sexually assaults her.
He's on the couch sleeping. She's getting ready for her day, totally unaware Tony Jackson is sleeping on the couch.
I think at one point she did walk out and see an individual sleeping on the couch, but she didn't think anything of it because this might have been a common occurrence with having roommates and having friends come over and falling asleep on the couch.
Wow. That's terrifying. 2 days after that rape, on May 19th, Tony Jackson was pulled over by the police in St. Paul. Police found essentially a rape kit in his vehicle.
And one thing that I think is very important in that situation is the time of day. This is at 3:30 in the morning. He is driving in a neighborhood in the St. Paul area with his headlights off, driving very slowly along the curb as if he's looking for some place or somebody. And that's when the police initiate the stop, the St. Paul police officers, again, at 3:30 in the morning. And if you remember back, the first sexual assault that we know of back in February, that was around 3:30 in the morning. It's a common theme, 3:30. Some of these are, the 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. And that's an important element later on. So they stop him. Before they approach him, they see some fidgeting in the car. He's reaching over in the passenger seat or towards the back car seat. So they suspect, they're a heightened alert because of his activities there. Long story short, they end up finding his fanny pack. And in the fanny pack, he's got the gun. He's got handcuffs. He's got a mask. He's got some bindings, ropes that are already pre-cut into certain lengths to make it easier to tie somebody up. So they end up arresting him for unlawful possession of a handgun. He doesn't have a lengthy criminal history. It's not that serious of an offense. So he sees the judge, and they post a bail.
Okay.
Your bail is X dollars. I don't know. It was not a very large sum, I don't believe. And his girlfriend's able to get the money and post the bond, and he's able to get out.
3 days after being arrested in St. Paul, Tony Jackson commits his final rape. By May 22nd, Jackson had become a manager at still another local restaurant. He had a habit of asking female employees about their schedules off the clock and their husbands' work schedules. Jackson's final victim was one of his own employees. At about 1:30 a.m., while her husband was working, she attempted to make a phone call after hearing a suspicious noise inside her house, but Tony Jackson had taken the downstairs receiver off the hook. Jackson had followed the woman home from a bar where she and other coworkers from the restaurant were gathering after their shift. Jackson had said he would join the group there, but he never showed. It does appear that he'd been watching the woman and the rest of the group from the bar, though. This attack was especially aggressive, and after the assault, Jackson rummaged through the victim's belongings. In doing so, he left behind a fingerprint that would later place him in the victim's bedroom. Jackson raping someone he worked with was a step too brazen, though. The victim believed she knew the rapist, that it was her boss at the restaurant, a man named Tony. Here's audio from his first comments while in custody.
Only you can tell us.
This guy is nice. Cut to the shit. I can't tell you nothing. Okay. I haven't raped anybody, and I know I haven't raped anybody, but you guys obviously think that I have.
Well, actually, the girls are saying that. Okay, we weren't there when it happened.
Okay, a girl. This is what I'm bothered with. A girl that I know says that I raped her. Why is she still living?
Who's that?
Huh?
Who's that?
I don't know. You just said Nicole.
I didn't say you raped Nicole. I said you raped your roommate.
Oh, her roommate?
Yeah.
Is this about Nicole or something? Her roommate?
What we're saying is that you were there at about 2 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
On Nicole.
Her roommate. Don't even. Her roommate. Somebody who knows me, who knows my face, knows how I look.
I'm saying that.
Why are you still living? Have you guys ever thought about that? Why are they still living?
Why would you kill him? You mean you'd kill him?
What do you mean would I kill him? If I was any kind of person...
You'd kill him?
No, don't twist my
words. You're going to see why would they still living.
Why is somebody still living? This is what I'm going to get it. If anybody in their right mind is going to go out to do something with somebody that they know, and knowing that these people are going to go to the police, why are they still living?
Only you can answer that question.
No, I can't answer that question because I haven't done anything to anybody.
But you're saying if you had, you would have killed him. Is that what you're saying?
No, that ain't what I'm saying. I'm saying I would never do anything to anybody, and therefore that question could never be answered because I would not have killed anybody if I had not done anything to anybody.
You know, if it hadn't been for the awareness of our Woodbury victim, I don't know if we would have gotten on to Tony Jackson. The victim says, I think it's this guy I work with, Tony. She mentions just Tony. She doesn't know his last name, but Tony. And the investigator's pretty good. He says, well, let's wait a minute. How'd you come to that conclusion? And she's able to go down the list and explain his mannerisms, his build. And during the rape process, the sexual assault, Jackson asked a number of questions to her, and it was as if he already knew the answers, and when she would say not the truth, he said, I don't like liars. So based on those factors and the fact that he was supposed to meet them after work but never showed up, and just had that minute or two to be able to process the whole event of that night and come up with the name Tony. Of course, then we go to the restaurant where he's working, and we start to get who's Tony, and we get Tony Jackson. We contact it's called St. Paul Identification Unit, and we say, you got anything on a Tony Jackson? And we'd run driver's license. This is people under Tony Jackson's name, so we had a Tony Jackson, his date of birth, and that's when they tell us, yeah, here's a police report from 2 days earlier when he's arrested with this gun and basically the rape kit. So we get that report right away. We drive down to the police department. We wanted it that quickly.
What do you think about people that lie to you there, Tony? What do you think about people that lie?
What do I think about people who lie? It's just like my grandma always told me. I don't trust it. If you lie, you steal. If you steal, you kill. No, I don't like either one of them.
And they go back and they had DNA evidence, and that's when they had it checked against Tony Jackson, and of course it matched Tony Jackson. So now he's tied into that one. Fortunately, they did have a towel that was used to clean her up, and there was DNA on there, and that was submitted at a later time. And that DNA evidence connected Tony Jackson to that rape also.
So he was aware of some physical evidence, fingerprints, even though he left one at one scene. He's aware of some kind of matching, but clearly he's not aware of, even at that time, DNA technology and how it could link him.
No, it surprises me. DNA was fairly, it was just really, it was around for a while, but it was really just getting going. I had the Cottage Grove scene had his fingerprint, and we actually, at the Woodbury scene, his fingerprint was found on the front door. But yeah, as far as DNA, he would take some towels and think he's cleaning up the victims, but then he'd leave the towels and evidence behind.
Tony Jackson is got an attitude that's going to put him in jail for a long time.
Tony Jackson, I handle everything with tact. You've not heard me use any vulgarities or any type of...
What does that have to do with you ending up in jail, Tony?
What does that have to do with me ending up in jail? It has a lot to do with me ending up in jail, because I was some little vicious criminal that you just said I was, or where it was a rapist and so forth. My demeanor would probably be a lot different, I think.
Why do you think that?
Why do I think that?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
how many sexual offenders have you dealt with, Tony?
How many sexual offenders that I dealt with ones I either see on TV or in trials or so forth, or the ones, when I go over to the courthouse and I sit down and I watch some of those trials and stuff and I take notes and stuff like that, I've seen some of those trials where they had sex offenders and all that type of stuff, and I look and I see them, and I see the drug dealers, and I see all these other people that are over there. That's not me. Okay? That's not me.
According to police and prosecutors, Tony Jackson had raped 4 women in the Twin Cities in 2 weeks and a total of 6 known rapes in 3 months from February to May 1997. When police in Minnesota discovered that such a prolific offender was living in Mason City on June 27, 1995, when Jodi Huisentruit disappeared, they notified the Mason City Police Department.
Finally, I think they felt the need to reach out. Mason City Police Department reached out to us and said told them what we had, and they eventually came up. It was said that the reason they didn't come up earlier because he was still going through the trials for the sexual assaults. So they didn't want to interfere with that. One of the reasons I got involved with FindJodi is that I felt that he wasn't thoroughly investigated, that to be eliminated. And again, going back and I'm not saying that he did it. I'm saying he's a type of person that would be capable of abducting Jodi. And so I felt they just needed to really look at him. And a couple of things that I got to be careful when I say, because I do support other law enforcement, but when law enforcement, they don't follow through with the information you give them, sometimes you got to maybe, stir the nest up a little bit. So they told me that they had their person. They believed they had their person that was responsible for Jodi.
So the detectives in Mason City, when they sat with you in Woodbury, they told you, we have our guy for Jodi.
We have our guy. Yeah, we have our guy. It's like, okay, but I said, you got to listen to some of these phone calls that he's made from jail. Listen to these. I sent him the tapes too. Listen, he just kept inserting himself into the Jodi situation, and Tony Jackson would be one of the first people that would bring up Jodi Huisentruit in several of the conversations. Nobody would be bringing it up and say, yeah, Tony, why are they looking at you for Jodi Huisentruit? So some of these things, it just, to me, was like, wow, you really got to look at this guy really hard.
So he's
do everything you can.
Is he talking to friends and family on the phone from jail, and he's bringing up Jodi before they do? Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Absolutely. He would bring them up and bring up Jodi, and they never would.
Eventually, MCPD issued a statement essentially clearing Jackson of Jodi's case. The statement said based on interviews, crime lab analysis, records review, and polygraph examination, they didn't consider Jackson a viable suspect in the Jodi Huisentruit case. About a year after Jackson was arrested, a WCCO reporter, Caroline Lowe, who's now a member of the FindJodi team, began work on a story that Tony Jackson, a violent offender and serial rapist, lived only 2 blocks from Jodi Huisentruit's workplace and a mile from her apartment when she disappeared.
We discovered he lived in a duplex just 2 blocks from the television station where Jodi worked and less than a mile from the apartment where Jodi lived. This woman lived with Jackson that summer. We showed her photo to police, who noted a startling resemblance. That woman says she loved Jackson, but also feared him because he physically abused her.
When he snapped, and it was violent, very violent. I mean, it was a totally different person. It was like the devil stepped inside of him and just took over.
His girlfriend moved out June 22nd in a stormy breakup. Jodi vanished 5 days later.
Another witness, who also wishes to remain anonymous, approached FindJodi and said she used to run past Jodi's apartment complex every day at about 4:30, and on the morning of Jodi's abduction, she says she was almost hit by a car zooming out of the complex's parking lot. The car that nearly hit her on that morning was similar to the vehicle that Tony Jackson had purchased the day before Jodi's abduction. That was the car he was forced to return after about 2 weeks of non-payment, and this is how we know how many miles Jackson put on the vehicle during this time.
The I-Team has obtained these documents showing Tony Jackson bought this car on Monday, June 26, the day before Jodi disappeared. He didn't own it for very long. He returned it to the dealer a couple of weeks later, after the $7,000 check bounced. During the 2 weeks he owned the car, Jackson put about 550 miles on it, a lot of miles in a small town.
Not long after that, Caroline filed this follow-up report.
Tonight I'm at the Mason City Police Department. Earlier this evening, investigators seized a car they want to examine, looking for any possible links to the abduction of Jodi Huisentruit. The I-Team discovered that Tony Jackson bought this car on June 26, 1995, the day before Jodi disappeared. He only owned the car for 2 weeks. Now it belongs to this woman who drove it to work today. She's been anxious for authorities to take the car. The I-Team told them about the vehicle 2 weeks ago.
How does it feel to be driving around with such a crucial piece of evidence, potentially?
I don't know how to describe it. It gives you willies, I guess. You know, it feels very weird.
Tomorrow, police will take the car to the State Crime Lab in Des Moines to look for potential forensic evidence.
Evidence is so minute now. We may be looking for a hair strand. After weeks, days, months go by, that hair strand can be removed just by someone getting in and out of that vehicle. Therefore, we feel it's very critical to receive that vehicle as soon as possible.
John Lang works at the Iowa Department of Criminal Investigation. He called the Tony Jackson lead a strong one. He says an agent will go to Minnesota to try to ask Jackson if he has an alibi.
We're going to attempt to contact him to further investigation by seeing if he'll cooperate with us. We don't know that he will, but we don't know that he won't.
We have already spoken several times with Tony Jackson, and he's always strongly denied any involvement in the abduction of Jodi Huisentruit.
This is part of Caroline Lowe's conversation with Tony Jackson in prison. Jackson denied ever meeting Jodi.
No, I can't even remember dates or nothing like that. So
You don't remember hearing on the news or what?
No,
that's the kind of thing you tend to remember. You know.
No, we remember on the news about what was going on, and everybody was going out and looking for it and stuff like that.
Remember that?
They was talking all and they were wearing those little white bands and stuff on the.
Oh yeah, that was a big thing. That was a big deal up here. Did you ever meet her at all?
Nope.
No contact at all. Wow. Who do you think what kind of person would have done it? From what you were down there when it happened, and what kind of? They don't seem to be getting anywhere on it.
To be honest with you, I'm not an expert in none of this stuff. I'm trying to figure out who is the culprit in the case that I'm dealing with now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I'm quite sure you guys watched 2020 last night.
I haven't seen it yet, but I'm sure we can get a tape of last night.
Yeah, 2020. I mean, it was
pretty good stuff.
I don't want to be sitting in jail for 10 years, 6 years, 5 years before people figure out that they made a mistake.
Yeah.
Okay?
So if somebody were to ask you about Jodi, you would say absolutely it had nothing to do with her disappearance. Am I right?
Yeah.
You don't know what happened to her. You don't know how it happened or anything either.
Nope.
Where do you think she is now?
I didn't answer your question, okay? Just answer your question.
Well, I'm just asking somebody who lived down there.
I have no idea. I have no idea. No recollection, no idea. You know, I don't know the lady. You know, I don't know nothing about her. She don't know nothing about me. You know, and guys digging up all this stuff. I mean, I'm quite sure if you know, police departments, FBI, all those guys, they probably did the same thing and came up with the same thing.
Do you think the FBI might be wondering about you and Jodi, too?
Excuse me?
Do you think the FBI might be asking the same thing we're asking about you in terms of whether you knew Jodi?
I have no idea.
Well, you were just saying that they're asking the same thing.
I'm saying that probably maybe the FBI and investigators and everybody else have probably been trying to, you know, figure out the same things that you're probably conveying to yourself right now, who's involved in her disappearance or whatever it is. But other than that, you know, I can't even elaborate on it because there's nothing that I can really even talk about. I mean, it has nothing concerning me anyway.
Then in 1999, Caroline Lowe aired a story for WCCO that would inextricably link Jackson to the Jodi Huisentruit disappearance. It started with an interview with a cellmate of Jackson's, who is now deceased.
Because I did a good acting role on him, he thinks I'm his psychopathic friend.
This man's been in jail a lot, mostly on drunk driving charges. Last spring, he was on the other side of the river, looking out of the Ramsey County Jail with his new friend, Tony Jackson. The man says he decided to con Jackson behind bars, so he acted like a big shot, making up stories of heinous crimes, dismissing Tony Jackson as a punk. He said that is what made Jackson confess.
I was looking out the day room window, and he came up to me. That's when we started talking again, and then he just brought it up. He says, I abducted a anchor woman and killed her, he said, just like that.
But jailhouse talk doesn't mean much without proof, in this case, a body. So he continued to con Jackson, till one day, he says, the rapist recited a chilling rap rhyme. A rhyme he thought might hold clues to the whereabouts of anchorwoman Jodi Huisentruit, abducted from her apartment parking lot more than 3 years ago.
She's a stiffin around Tiffin, and pilot a silage and a bylow low below, off a highway by a grave road.
What did it mean? The WCCO I-team was able to confirm that our source indeed had been in the same cell block as Tony Jackson. Our source was also able to give us information about Jackson that matched information the I-team had confirmed about the convicted rapist.
She's a stiffin around Tiffin.
About 3 hours south of Mason City, where Huisentruit and Jackson lived, is a tiny town called Tiffin. The distance was important to the I-team because it fit another possible clue. Heavy miles put on Tony Jackson's car around the time the anchorwoman vanished. The I-team has also learned Tony Jackson has no alibi until 11 hours after Jodi vanished, leaving him plenty of time to drive to Tiffin and back. So using the rap as a map, the I-team went to Tiffin, Iowa.
Off a highway.
The only highway through town is this one.
By a grave road.
Could a grave road mean a road by a graveyard? Just outside of town, along Highway 6, we found this cemetery. We turned down the first road and found this abandoned farmstead.
And pilot a silage and a bylow low below.
There are few silos in this part of Iowa, so this one, less than a mile from the graveyard, grabbed our attention.
There's not much traffic on this road. It doesn't really go anyplace, you know.
The I-team wondered, could this rundown property hold a secret that might lead us to Jodi? So the I-team rented the land from the property owner, who confirmed it stood empty for at least 10 years, including the summer of the abduction.
Well, I find it pretty coincidental that in the rhyme that Tiffin is mentioned, we know that Jackson played basketball down there in Ottumwa, and that's not that far, so he'd be familiar with that area. Now, the cellmate that claims Jackson recited this rhyme, would he have been familiar with the town of Tiffin, Iowa, to be able to make this up? And a couple of the other things that really wasn't aired, just basically concentrated on the rhyme. He mentions that Jackson admitted to him that he stalked, this is the words that he used, that he stalked and abducted a news anchor woman and killed her. Now, that wasn't aired, but that's part of Caroline's interview with the cellmate, which you look at those elements. He claims he stalked Jodi, which we know there's elements of stalking in some of these sexual assaults.
Back in 1999, Caroline's report included cadaver dogs that were hired to search the silo in Tiffin. Detectives from the MCPD were present as well. And according to local law enforcement, 2 of the 3 cadaver dogs that searched the silo area indicated to human remains. But when it comes to that silo, officials later concluded that no human remains were present or had been present. The sense the dogs were reacting to, according to officials, may have been animal. Mason City Police have never been any more specific in their public statement in 1999 about why they eliminated Jackson. Then Chief Ellingson expressed some interest in the lead at the time, but later, Detective Frank Stern said he did not believe Jackson was involved. Another MCPD investigator on the case also later seemed to rule out Jackson, noting the department had investigated his whereabouts the day before. That's when Jackson apparently suffered an injury at work and left early. Now that you've heard the circumstances against Tony Jackson that have led many to question whether he may have abducted Jodi Huisentruit, Jay and I will take a moment to discuss what it might mean to what happened to Jodi and the future of the investigation. That's coming up next. The investigator outside of the case told me once, it took me by surprise because I hadn't thought of it to that point, that they thought that handcuffs were the most likely restraint used with Jodi to quickly, snap it on, hands behind her back. I had not thought of handcuffs being used in Jodi's case prior to that suggestion because who walks around with handcuffs except for rapists, obviously. But we know Jackson uses handcuffs in one of his rapes at least. I think that particular set was bought after Jodi's disappearance. I think you established it was bought at a sex shop afterwards. But the point is he's using handcuffs. So what do you make of Jodi's scene as relates to handcuffs? And then obviously we know that Jackson has used those in attacks too.
Yeah, it's a very likelihood that handcuffs could be. I mean, they're pretty fast to be able to put on somebody. And we do believe Jackson had handcuffs prior to Jodi's disappearance. There's a victim of a sexual assault that was never taken real serious. It was reported, and it was prior to Jodi's disappearance. It was more of a kind of a acquaintance. I don't want to say, I guess similar to a date rape. They thought that there might be a relationship there, or didn't want to quite go to that point of a sexual intercourse thing. And that person has reported to us that they did see handcuffs in Jackson's apartment, living quarters at that time that assault occurred. And we know that he left a pair of handcuffs on the victim in Worth County. They had to cut them off. I have a picture of those.
Wow.
It's a black and
Makes
white
you wonder,
photocopy.
he's 19, 20 in the years before Jodi disappeared. What is a man in his early 20s, late teens even, doing with a pair of handcuffs lying around?
Right. Yeah. It's kind of what maybe the individuals get into for sexual act. Could be the purpose,
It could be.
But I've never heard that was used. I know the girlfriend that he had at the time he was arrested, they never had any sexual intercourse.
Right, yeah. She said it was not, there was nothing out of the ordinary, quote unquote, in their relationship.
Right, yeah. And as far as the one he had at the time, I don't recall if she ever mentioned anything about handcuffs being used. It is odd. And is that why would he have taken the handcuffs? If he did, Jackson was involved and he handcuffed Jodi, would he have taken the time to remove the handcuffs and still had them? My guess is he probably wouldn't have left the handcuffs on her if it was him.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to use them for a later time.
Right.
And why he left the handcuffs on certain victims. And, the Worth County, why he left her handcuffed. It's the only one I think that the handcuffs were left behind.
All right, let me read you from that interview Jackson gave with KIMT. Jackson says, "You can't miss a 6'5" black man trying to struggle with a white woman this early in the morning, and nobody know nothing or saw anything." And he makes that reference again. He's pointing out to the interviewer that the abductor of Jodi must have been someone close to her, Jackson speculates, and he says, "Nobody saw nothing, especially a big 6'5" black guy struggling with a white woman." And I know that has stood out to you, I guess for a couple of reasons, right? Because it's a very visual scene that he's painting, perhaps one that had happened before, one might think. But also, how does he know nobody didn't see anything?
Yeah, other than the fact that he's never been identified as a person at that scene, never thoroughly investigated. Those are odd statements that he makes twice, that especially a big 6'5" black guy struggling with a white woman.
Chief Ellingson was chief at the time in 99 when this lead kind of came up with Jackson. He seemed interested, just running through public statements, and there aren't many that MCPD have made. Frank Stearns later said he did not believe Jackson was involved, just flat. Another investigator who was on Jodi's case said, we checked out where he was the day before, don't think he could have been involved, referring to the hospital incident, right. I guess. So I guess from the outside, and we don't know from the inside, but from the outside, it seems like they did look at it in terms of maybe the polygraph. I know Caroline reported that they did find that car that Jackson was driving around. They did some testing on that. Right. Somebody else had owned it by then, obviously, and time had gone by. So that apparently came to nothing. And then they went to the hospital and I assume talked to people and verified the fact that he was there. I guess my own suspicion is that was more or less the extent of their investigation into Jackson. And in this world, this theory where he's setting up this crime, but if he's trying to alibi himself for Jodi's disappearance a couple of days before that, I guess investigators could look at him and look at that and say that's not possible and just move on. I don't know, is that conspiracy theory land to think that he's going to plan like that in the days leading up to the abduction? It's hard for me to decide.
We don't know what Mason City Police Department has done in regards to Jackson, the investigation into Jackson. But there's several things that I think if they hadn't done, I would have done, investigating. Because like I said, we don't know if Jackson was involved. But one of the things you do want to do as an investigating agency, you want to make sure that if you later down the road, let's say you arrest somebody for the abduction and killing of Jodi Huisentruit, you want to make sure there's not an alternate suspect that could be brought up in the defense. Because if a defense attorney gets a hold of an alternate suspect, they could create a shadow of a doubt in a juror's mind by presenting a well laid out alternate suspect. In my opinion right now to this point, and again, this is based on not knowing exactly everything that Mason City Police have done in the investigation, that Jackson would be an alternate suspect that I think would create some doubt in a juror's mind whether the person they arrested is actually the perpetrator. Yeah, and one of the things going back is, okay, he claimed he injured his leg. He goes to the hospital. So do you go back? Did they go back to the place he injured his leg at? Was there any witnesses? What's the first report of injury report say?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. We also know that based on the police report after Jodi's disappearance, that Jackson worked at Perkins. And we believe he worked there, according to a resume that he himself had written up, is that he worked at Perkins at the time Jodi disappeared, before and maybe after. And he had some kind of issue with an employee, and she had quit because of harassment by Jackson. Wouldn't you want to go and interview those people?
Especially when you find out later that he goes on to sexually assault coworkers.
Absolutely, right. Yeah, and it wasn't an opportunity for him to meet her. I think that's one of the things that some of the comments that they have made, Mason City Police have made, is that they couldn't find anything where their paths had crossed. I think that's out there. That's the statement they made. And initially, I think they also said that they didn't take Jackson as a viable suspect because the MO was different. It's like, well, at that time, I don't think at that time maybe the Minneapolis victim had come forward. It might have been a little bit later, but still, once that came, I don't think that the MO is a lot different than some of these sexual assaults.
Yeah. Also, in the KIMT interview of Tony Jackson, he offers up what he thinks happened at Jodi's abduction was the assault actually occurred in the apartment, and the staged scene outside, her items were spread out around her car to make it, misdirect basically the police outside. Right. What do you make of that theory of Jackson's?
Again, is he trying to make it look like it couldn't have been him? It actually started in her apartment, so it had to have been somebody close to her, because I think he even makes that comment to KMT, is that it had to be someone close to her. So is he trying to deflect the actual scene of where it occurred? So therefore it couldn't be me because it started in her apartment. It doesn't fit me type of thing.
Let's talk about the jogger too. How did you learn about that, and how do you think that fits in?
Years ago, Gary and Josh from our team had interviewed her and came up with information that she was jogging. She was a regular jogger at around 4:30 in the morning. I think that morning of Jodi's disappearance, she was running a couple minutes late. And Jeff Ballion from Fox 9 News up here in the Twin Cities was doing a story, and he wanted to interview her, and he asked me to come along with him. So we went down to Rochester and met with her and kind of wanted to go over what was already reported to Josh and Gary. Because, if you go back and you ask somebody, tell me this again, what happened, you're going to see consistency in their story, which gives them some validity to their statements. If you go back and their story is totally different, then you're going to wow, this is not very reliable information. So she told us the story, and it was right in line with what she had told years ago to Gary and Josh. And a couple of the things that she tells Jeff and I, which I thought was really interesting, is that morning she's running by, she's jogging, this car comes racing out of there, and she says, somebody was really mad and in a big hurry. And she described the vehicle. She wasn't really quite sure the color. Different lighting at night can make a vehicle look a little different color. But she had one point said blue, and then maybe went to red, and she says it was kind of shiny. Well, given the fact that Jackson had just bought this car off a used car lot, it had to have been pretty clean, I would assume.
It's a blue car.
And it was a blue car. So, she said it wasn't a small, it was more of a mid-size or so car. So, that's okay. Well, that's interesting. Well, the other couple of interesting pieces that she relayed to us is that, I think it was a day before or maybe a couple of days before, she's jogging by there, and again, 4:30 in the morning, and this was she described as a young African-American boy, come riding up next to her on a bicycle and right by her, and looked over at her, and she looked at him, and as soon as she looked at him, he veered off, turned around, and went back the other direction. Okay, well, Jackson, can be look fairly young, maybe teenager looking. The other thing she says is days before that, there's she described as a gremlin type older car, looking car like a gremlin, is pacing her, driving along next to her. She doesn't give a description of the driver at all, but just like it was pacing her, driving along next to her. And then he takes off. She distinctly remembers those acts, because at 4:30 in the morning, you're out jogging. Usually there's not too much activity or nothing is going to happen when you're out that hour in the morning. So you're going to remember some of those things. And what I find very interesting too, again, is her description of the vehicle, an older gremlin. Well, his girlfriend, Jackson's girlfriend, they had an older Geo. And I pulled up images from Google, and it's possible a Geo could very similar to a gremlin. It's a little different, but somebody that doesn't know vehicles real well would have a closest remembrance, so they remember a gremlin, so it was kind of like a gremlin. Yeah, another circumstantial or suspicious piece that
right. Well, in the pacing of the jogger, we see that later in Minneapolis, the pacing of the first victim. And at one of the scenes, there's Jackson's witness just tearing out of the scene by a witness.
Right.
Obviously, not linkage to Jodi's case, but
right.
Similar MO going forward.
Yeah. And keep in mind, one in Minneapolis, when she stopped at that light, the traffic light, Jackson parked in a parking lot right by that intersection. So he parks his vehicle, and he's got to get out of his vehicle, and he's got to make a beeline to her car to get that door
before the light turns green.
That had to have been pretty quick. He had to have been moving pretty good to get there. That's how fast and quick I think Jackson is. I mean, he played basketball. You got to be quick for short distances. It's almost like a quick sprint or spurt of energy. All these things, to me, in my opinion, point that Jackson needed to be thoroughly investigated. And I mean thoroughly. Everything. His girlfriend at the time, his coworkers, students, any associate that was familiar with Jackson. And as far as I know, talking to Jackson's girlfriend that he had at the time of Jodi's disappearance, I mean, it's just within the last few weeks. Before she didn't remember, she said she wasn't interviewed by the Mason City Police. Now she's like, well, I may have been, but if they did, it would have been so brief because she doesn't remember it.
I've run into that too, though, with people are confused about being interviewed by DCI or MCPD or in some cases private investigators. And It has been a long time. So I could see that confusion, whether or not she was talked to about this and by who.
Right. Yeah. Regardless of by who, she doesn't remember actually, the fact that they did talk to her, whether it was DCI or the Mason City Police. You want more than, well, do you know where he was at the time she disappeared? Were you with him? You want to know more. Who did he hang out with? What was his pattern? What was happening before? What happened after? And the other interesting thing, we don't know what kind of items were taken from Jodi's handbag. Was a handbag ever recovered? She's on her way to work. We know the shoes, the hairdryer, and some other stuff was left behind. Did she have any jewelry? And one thing I asked the ex-girlfriend about, well, when you got back together, did Jackson give you anything? And she recalls that Jackson had given her a ring. And she doesn't have any pictures of it. She wasn't able to describe it. But, I thought, wow, here's a guy, they were very financially strapped. Yeah, he's bouncing job to job. Where would he get the money to get a ring?
Yeah.
Where did that ring come from?
And if you look at any picture of Jodi, she wears 2 rings on her right and left hand, and she'll switch them between her ring finger or her middle finger, on camera, off camera. But in even personal photos going back to her college days, she has these rings on. They're very simple. There's nothing gaudy, but Jodi loved to accessorize. She consistently wore those rings just every waking moment, it seems like. So the fact that Jackson's girlfriend is given a ring is, again, one more link, circumstantial.
Right. Doesn't say he did it. And I think in this case, Jodi's abduction, there is one key piece of evidence that is missing. And once that piece is found, I think the case will be solved.
How would we find answers, given where he is, given where the case is at now?
Well, like I said, it's one piece of key evidence that would link the perpetrator to Jodi's abduction. Otherwise, it's going to come from a confession, and a confession would have to be able to direct you to where her remains are. I mean, you see it all the time. For whatever reason, you get these false confessions, but they're not able to direct law enforcement, the authorities, to where the remains are. People, they make false confessions for whatever reason, attention, whatever, and they have some of the details, and those details generally are obtained through newspapers or on the news, and that's why I can see why law enforcement will withhold a key piece of evidence that they have in their possession that only the perpetrator would know. But in this case, they don't have Jodi's body. That's one piece of key evidence that you don't have. So that everything else you could lay out everything you have, because only the perpetrator is going to know where the remains are at.
Right.
So you're not going to get a false confession based on what you've released.
You have to corroborate it somehow, and the body would be the best way.
Absolutely. That'd be the only corroborating evidence on any kind of confession. Because I don't think there's any other details that really hasn't been out, the crime scene and everything that's left behind and kind of how she was done. I don't think there's anything that...
anything we don't know about that police are holding back that's big enough that it would link somebody to the crime. Yeah, I mean, I hope there is. I kind of think there could be, but that might just be optimism on my part. But obviously, whoever put Jodi where she still is today, that information would be the biggest. It's what it ends up being in most of these cold cases that are that old. It's either DNA, which odds are not great with Jodi, or the remains.
Exactly. Yeah, if they do find her remains, the possibility of having any physical evidence that would tie a perpetrator to the crime is not very likely.
No. To kind of wrap things up, it's interesting for me because Jackson is the only name of all of the names in Jodi's case. Jackson's the only name where I can say 100% he could have done it. In every other name, something may not necessarily fit. But part of the reason I wanted to go detail by detail, case by case on Jackson is the puzzle pieces are there when it comes to Jodi. You can put a combination of those attacks he commits later in the Twin Cities together, and you can arrive at what happened to Jodi Huisentruit. You can't say that for some of the other offenders, I don't think. Some can be likely, but he's the only guy where I say 100% he could have done it. What we're missing is, did he do it?
Right. I'd like to end with one last comment that Jackson made again that would and should bring the attention to investigators and make them really look deep, is that sentencing statement that he makes when he's sentenced in Washington County. He addresses the courtroom. He says the courtroom, so we don't know, there are no aggravating circumstances, but we really think this guy's going to go out here and he's a danger to the public. He's going to go out here and he's going to rape somebody else. He's going to do something to somebody else. He might go out and kill somebody else. I mean, that's just that last part of it. He says he might go out and do this or rape somebody else. Well, we know he raped people already. He's hurt people. But then he goes and says he might go out and kill somebody else. Why would you say kill somebody else if you've never killed anyone?
So that was Jackson's statement to the court before they sentenced him?
Correct.
So he said that himself?
He said that. Those are his words. Those are transcribed from the courtroom reporter there.
So this is Jackson basically standing up and saying, I'm not a threat to anyone. I'm not going to go rape anybody else. I'm not going to go kill anybody else.
Right.
And
then after he says that statement about he might, when he's talking, he's referring to himself. He said, this is him talking. He might go out and kill somebody else. He might do something to somebody and then he ends. He ends that, and then he goes on to say, it's like he caught himself what he was saying. And he goes on, and then he says, I'm going to tell you guys today, I'm not a monster by any means. The media played me up, and they took pride in putting my face on the news. But I'm going to tell you guys today, I'm not a monster by any means.
Meanwhile, 4 rapes in 2 weeks, 6 rapes in 3 months.
And the planning's in,
right?
Yeah, and who knows? If there's other victims.
Well, I mean, obviously we can't say, but you read that first known victim, the brazenness of the attack. It would just be very surprising to me if that were his first victim.
Especially with this whole OJ fucked it up for everybody. I mean, you know, with this whole thing with OJ, I mean, after that, I mean, pretty much I'm a marked man for life. But other than that, I just don't see it.
Why would you be a marked man for life? Because of OJ?
Because, I mean, everybody's perception, it goes through television. Their perception of me, I mean, OJ was a nice looking black man, was very successful in what he did. He had money and everything else. But yet, he killed his wife. Even if he didn't do it, he's been labeled by the media as someone who has killed his wife and who is white, you know, and they're thinking that black people are very aggressive towards their white counterpart, which is either their fiance, someone that was their wife or girlfriend and so forth. And that pretty much labels me as someone, you know, even though I'm good looking, attractive, I'm successful in the things that I've done, and I have an education, does not mean I'm not an OJ. That means that, you know, that's behind this mask could be something very mysterious to someone who could possibly, you know, kill me at some point in time. It's what I see perception of is, you know, with anyway.
You don't look like a guy to me that would kill somebody.
I know I would never kill. I mean, if I want to kill somebody, I mean, it would reflect. I mean, I just don't, and like this whole rape thing and stuff, if I want to rape somebody, it would reflect. Why all of a sudden now would I decide to...
Tony, that's why, I mean, this gal says...
Thank you for listening to this longer than usual episode of the FindJodi podcast. But when it comes to Tony Jackson as a subject, he is complicated to present. Maybe part of the reason why he hasn't stuck out more in a community of 30 or 40,000 people as an interesting person to look into for Jodi's case is because of how complicated the Jackson information is. At the end of the day, we have a serial rapist who stalked his victims over months, living 2 blocks from Jodi Huisentruit's workplace, 1 mile from her apartment. It is still an angle of interest to the FindJodi team, but it is not to say that Tony Jackson was responsible for Jodi's disappearance, and so our investigation continues. FindJodi is a nonprofit run by a team of volunteers. Your donations are extremely helpful in our operating costs, including our active billboard campaign in Mason City. We're releasing episodes of the FindJodi podcast every other Thursday. That puts our next episode coming up on Thursday, April the 1st. We'll talk to you then.